super low executive functioning, because his anger, depression, anxiety seemed to be popping out at me, and sort of a team strength-based approach worked with him. So, I mean, that, I know I'm popping all over the place with this, but those are what my takeaways from James were. And sort of the follow-up part, David, I know we kind of did like, okay, info to drive coaching, and then what's the follow-up? So I literally just look right at the stats and I go right in. Figures. Without even looking about the explanation. So if I'm going that, I just go into the numbers because I've read so many.
Yeah.
Those are my original takeaways.
So I'm scrolling down to what you initially said about. Oh, go ahead, Jeremiah.
When you say the stats, are you just referring to like the figures below, like each like sub assessment? You know, like where it says like PSI. You're just looking at the figures below that, and then you look at working memory, the figures below that, or is stats like towards the end somewhere?
I do percentile. So if I am looking at him, and again, I'm sorry, David, you're scrolling around, and
so this is the executive function piece, right?
Right. This is what yeah. So I was just seeing a bunch of 30th percentiles, 5th percentile.
Yeah.
This is not necessarily where I was looking. So just like really low percentile ranks. That just popped out at me. And when I'm scanning a neuropsych, that's initially what I would highlight and make notes on, and then delve deeper.
Yeah, Carrie, thanks for starting off.
Sorry, I hope that might not make sense. I was a big stats
No, I
person.
kind of want everyone to chime in. Like, I'd love to hear from Carolyn. I think, I would love to hear from an SLP perspective. What do you take out of this?
So I also look right at the stats. I think probably most of us at least jump there. And what I take out of it is, as an SLP, obviously I always look at the verbal first, and it's strong. I look at for a discrepancy, and there's a little bit of one, because I can't just look at the verbal, because social thinking and social skills and social interaction is so nonverbal. So then I look at the other ones as well. So what I see here is somebody who has everything pretty much intact, which is great, because now I know, to me, I'm dealing more with a social emotional issue. Foundationally, what I'm going to kind of work on to help that kid access those really good cognitive skills. That's what it looks like.
That's so funny, because I am so the opposite. I do not look at stats first. It's like actually the very last thing I look at. I'm very much, but because I'm tedious and nitpicky about everything, like very much, what's your referral question? Yes, we're looking at social emotional. Yes, there's concerns about, inattention. But then I'm sitting there and I'm looking, like obviously developmental history, but I'm all about approach to task. Like if you're sitting there and you're observing that a kid's frustration tolerance is super low, or they try something once and give up, or, they go on and on and on past time limits and refuse to give up. Like I think numbers tell us a lot, but I think sometimes it doesn't tell us the whole picture. And like, that's where sometimes I get bogged down, because I sometimes overthink the like behavioral piece of it. And so it was interesting with James, because like his fluid reasoning was an area of weakness for him. So those like coming up with multiple solutions to one problem, that is challenging. And it was funny because like as he's reporting it and like kind of his approach to things, and those sometimes do go hand in hand with that anxiety piece and that frustration piece, or that part that looks like inattention. So I was like, okay, yeah. So this, to me, like the observation piece just kind of, I think is like the meat, and then like the numbers give you like, yes, now we can actually quantify it and prove it, versus, oh, I'm just trying to interpret this behavior. I don't know if that made sense. I'm just a nerd, so.
So Megan, it sounds like you and I do exactly what you, so I look at the number and then I go to that meat that you're talking about, and I look for the quotes, and I look for, exact explanations of how the kiddo is within that testing situation.
Yeah, no,
So,
I feel
yeah.
you.
And I do too. And I also, though, I think if you bring up a really good point, Megan, because, and I always look at that and I always consider it, but I always wonder, like, yeah, okay, so you saw that kid for an hour and a half and you're commenting on that. And so how much credibility am I going to give that behavior, because I don't know what else they know about the kid. So sometimes I tend to discount that, and I think it's really and I think I shouldn't. So thank you for reminding me of that.
No, but you make a good point too, that people are going to respond differently to sometimes having a rapport with somebody that you evaluate is a benefit, and sometimes it's the worst thing in the world, because anything that has to do with school setting they're going to hate. So that is a really good point.
Megan, did you see, when you read the executive function part of this report, and then you read the summary, did you see the connection between what the data was showing and how this clinician wrote up the summary?
Sorry, I have to quickly refresh my memory on it, because I remember not being blown away by executive functioning testing specifically. Blown away in terms of, this is a huge area that strikes me as, something that is going to be a glaring issue for this child. I know that, he was saying, there were a lot of errors and that could show impulsivity or inattention to things, and, carelessness. But the way that it was then summarized, I think he made good sense the way that he summarized it, but I don't think that it was, that's where I'm kind of saying, I don't rely just on numbers, because it doesn't always tell you the whole picture.
Yeah, I find myself always looking at the numbers, even though I think we can all agree the numbers never tell the whole story. But I still look at them for some odd reason. I don't know. But the summary was fantastic. This report. I mean, the summary was it was louder and clearer than any of the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that was just something I don't give a lot of credence to at first. And I felt like I don't know. I felt like I was having to start over in terms of how I evaluate neuropsychs. I'll tell you what I saw when I read the background information, and I saw that there was a piece about the adoption and the family history. I was thinking to myself, oh, this might be a rather complicated evaluation, because we may see some discrepancies in cognitive functioning and neurological development based on the biological parents, and I started thinking, just from a behavioral perspective, if this child was born addicted, that kind of trauma, brain trauma, and I was expecting to see a story that would match maybe some kind of that kind of assumption, but I didn't see any of it. And so I almost felt like I was wrongly building an assumption based on the background, and I don't know if I should have done that.
No, I agree with you. I also I was wondering about the adoption piece, but the other thing too is I read the history about, just kind of little comments here and there, but rigidity and social difficulties. And I thought that they were really making this buildup of autism before even reading the testing, hearing this background. And I felt guilty. I see Carolyn nodding her head, right? I was I feel guilty for assuming. And sure enough, I mean, they did do a lot of your standard, Nepsi theory of mind type thing. Yeah. But there's no evidence of it, and I felt bad for just assuming that's what it was going to be.
I did the same. I thought the recommendations were excellent. And I definitely have read a lot of these reports, but gonna hold on to the recs of this one. They're really good.
That's what's really hard, I think, also, is that you're going to get between clinicians such a vast difference in how deep they go into the recommendations. I mean, sometimes it's here are 5 recommendations, and they're like one sentence each. And, you know, then we get one like this where it's like, oh my God, it just blows you away when you get into it. I was like, whoa, this person is on it.
So for me, I like to go to the summary and the recommendations, and I'm usually looking at these as part of a team. So it's sort of, why do we do this in the first place? And then how do we bring this to life? What are, from the summary and the recommendations, what are the most important factors? Sometimes the numbers can tell a story. Sometimes they tell a story that surprises you in one way or the other, but it doesn't necessarily state how they function for me. And I don't always understand them as well as I should. Like, you work with a kid every day and you go, wow, they scored really low, really high in this area. This isn't even a concern for them in the classroom because they can do A, B, and C that are like sort of the strategies they developed. So what are the few things that we were looking for? And if there's answers to those questions, great, let's get those strategies going. If not, well, then what are the new questions we developed? And like, are those things we can make come to life in the classroom or at home or whatever the case may be?
David, can I ask a question about sort of just EEC? I don't know if it's like a standard thing, but when we have, say, an initial session, or we get a client where there's a screening, like one of my first questions as a coach is, oh, okay, so when was the last time he or she was tested? Oh, could you provide that? Because then you're doing that basic paperwork at the beginning. And most people are like, oh, you want the neuropsych? It's like a surprise. Or, you know, if it's like 5 or 6 years ago, not necessarily, but sometimes it does help me paint a picture. Is there sort of like what we need to follow as EEC coaches? Like, okay, the screening has come, the kid was tested, say, in school and had an outside neuro. As a coach, are we sort of pressed to say, can we have a copy of testing? For me, it's always been helpful. But I just don't know, like, is that protocol for all of us, or do we just do client to client?
Yeah, you know, I think as we even think about the relevance of this training, it's. I think if there has been a neuropsych done, you know, they can be really informative to the right, in the right situation. So when you think of our role as coaches, well, there's layers to that. There's the client-specific layer that involves executive function skill development. Cool. Well, if there was an executive function evaluation done and recommendations that came out of that are meaningful and helpful, well, I want to know what they are so that I can lean on them, so that maybe I'm not just listening to the mom and dad, and I'm getting another clinical perspective that the parents are going to miss those details because they're not seeing it through our lens. So I'm always asking for the neuropsych reports when I do screenings, and I'm always putting in recommendations into my notes to say, get neuropsych report. But it's buried in there. So, and it's not, you know, it can be really informative. I'll tell you where it really is powerful for me is if I start seeing really low working memory or processing speed, it really informs why certain things are so hard for that child. Right? And it also helps to, like in this report, it helps to rule out underlying conditions, right? Why is this kid so anxious? Where is this anxiety coming from? Is it a processing speed issue where the world's going faster than he can manage? Is it a working memory where the brain just can't handle the information, real time, and it's just getting overloaded, and that's triggering the emotions? You know, all of these questions come up. So the neuropsych can help rule out things a lot of the time. And then when you start to get into the recommendations, I agree. I think the recommendations in this report were fantastic. They really were applicable and usable. And there's layers here when it comes to, okay, what are some recommendations in the home? And that's what this broke up into, like, okay, what can be done in the home? What can be done in the school? And as coaches, we can facilitate all of it. Right? So mom and dad, when are you going to present this report to the school? What do you mean? Well, when are you going to sit down with the team and present this report? Well, we haven't really thought about that. Oh, okay. Well, let's plan a time to work that out, so that you are putting together a support plan in the school where your child is getting evaluated for services. So you can become now that support that takes this information and starts to do something with it. And I think that's really valuable to parents. They spend a lot of money on these reports and they don't know what to do with them. They don't. And to have someone roll up their sleeves, get to know their kid, and then say, let's talk more about this report. I have some concerns and recommendations. And your parents are like, holy shit, you have what? Well, I read the report. I think it's important for us to address some of these areas that are still unaddressed, meaning your child is not in therapy. Oh yeah, I forgot about that detail. Yeah, it's a number one detail is get involved with them in therapy. Okay, so we need to work that into your child's program so that your child is getting to know a therapist for the next 10 years, right? So that's really, really important. Parents, if you just they have one child, which is a lot easier to handle versus like 3, but having someone that is helping them figure that stuff out is really, really helpful. So when you think of our role, I always try to promote within each of us to be dynamic coaches and to see opportunities to play a bigger role within the family. Why? Well, because if we can make a greater impact, then let's do it. It's just, you gotta build your capacity to make those recommendations. I gotta build my knowledge and confidence and skills to make those recommendations and have those kinds of topics. I don't really know much about the IEP, the 504. Okay, I'm gonna call Carrie because she does, or I'm gonna call Joe because he does, and I'm gonna really figure out how to approach that stuff with a parent. I don't really know how to read this nonverbal stuff. I'm going to give Carolyn a call because she definitely knows how to interpret this stuff and can help me figure out what might be helpful for the parents to know about this. I've actually taken these reports, as you probably have too, and you go through it with the child if they're of that age. And I'm doing that with Sam as we speak, just helping him to go through his report, and understand what it means. So that's a really good question, Kara. I'm really glad you brought that up. I just don't know what people don't know. So part of me has an assumption that we know certain things, but for me I try not to base try not to exist on assumptions. So thanks for asking that. Any other points, comments, questions?
Sorry. I feel like I'm over speaking, but I'm thinking just in normal, like regular ed situations where younger kids, especially if there's a problem that comes up, the first question is to the school. The school says, okay, we'll do our testing. And then the parents, depending on ages, will reach out and have an additional outside testing done and be brought into the equation. So that's a lot of what my clients have done. And that's always like, okay, sometimes it doesn't necessarily, and Megan may be able to speak to this more, it doesn't always gel with what the school has found. And so I've definitely helped families sort of navigate that situation, whether it's being part of the meeting, dissecting the school testing and the neuropsych, meeting with the person who did the testing and just sort of finding out more information, because it does need to be this cohesive thing, but sometimes it's viewed either by the school or the family as all separate entities, where it really should be this like team approach that we're trying to do. So I don't know if Megan can, or anyone can speak more to that in that part, Carolyn, whoever, where you guys have different viewpoints. I'm always like, I feel like I'm Switzerland, I'm trying to do the best for the client, but I get where the school's at, I get where the neuropsych is being introduced, and very confusing. And sometimes they don't match up at all with recommendation wise.
I think that I'm sure they don't match up recommendation wise in mainstream schools. I mean, of course that's my impression. And then where I work, we line up a whole lot closer and are actually like, neuropsych recommendations are like kind of like come to, where I work. Small classrooms, no changing, visual schedules, everybody, just all the stuff right in a school. So a lot of the recommendations. So it's nice for we. So it's so funny, and we sit at the meeting table as the saviors, with the public school district sitting at the table as the bad people.
Yeah.
And that is how, and that is kind of how it looks usually at an IEP meeting at my school.
And I kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So like what we see is that usually there's contention around if the family's looking for a different placement or if it's an initial. Typically, if it's more just about increasing accommodations and things like that, it's usually pretty easy. And if there's contention there, you sort of have to ask yourself why. Like, there's something wrong with the relationship, and like you're saying, it's really becoming repairing the dynamic in the team as opposed to meeting the kids' the students' needs, because there's something going on there. But it's really, for some reason, schools are and in order to, like, for a variety of political reasons, say, keeping their numbers down, those sorts of things. But initials can be really hard to implement or to get the schools to agree to, in terms of saying this is an IEP versus a 504, or especially if it's, say, just an executive functioning issue, or it's really hard to determine if it's a specific learning disability. Maybe our testing didn't find it and your testing did, but the school's testing is going to say, well, we did a lot more observations and we use, so it's like you're saying, there's a lot of layers to it. But at the end of the day, what is going to help this student the best? And if someone is able to sort of take that holistic view and say, regardless, if we don't meet the student's needs internally, it's going to cost us one way or the other, and most importantly, it's going to cost the student. So it's really complicated. I guess it's just my 2 cents on it.
I was actually going to say something really similar, where I feel like any disagreement I've had is either about placement or about eligibility. But in terms of the actual recommendations for, like, certain services, like, for instance, James's neuropsych, like, I would have a hard time thinking that a school would disagree with those recommendations based on the testing and based on, like, the fact that most of those recommendations can be provided to him without any type of formal service plan. And so I would have a hard time, but I'm sure it happens, but I would have a hard time believing a school would argue that, like, things like, hey, give him a copy of notes so he's not, getting confused with the visual spatial of, like, blackboard to paper margins. Mm-hmm. But I also think this is a really well done report as well, which is hard to come by.
Yeah, and I think this report could position special ed services, when you think about the recommendations, a social emotional diagnosis that might lend itself to a modified instruction and learning center or strategies classes to get specialized one-to-one instruction during the week. This could open doors, but parents don't know what to do next, and I think that's always a hard thing. And I found myself, and I think a couple of you too, is you find yourself rolling up your sleeve in these situations, and it's exciting. It's exciting because you're solving problems on so many different levels, and you're making an impact that's so far beyond that one moment in time when you show up at the house or you get on a call with your client. And parents don't know what they don't know. So our job is to help them ask the right questions. Have you thought about this? No, I haven't. Well, let's plan a time to talk more about that. And you're always looking ahead at different angles that help your child, help the team. And you're looking at all the moving parts. It's really, really, to me, I've found to be one of the most exciting things about being a coach is, we call ourselves executive function coaches, but, there's so much more there. Once you get to know the child and the family, you're in. You're in. And so it's like, okay, I looked at that report. I want to revisit some things about that now that I know your child better. And so that's where these reports, it doesn't mean you have to jump in and tackle everything in here, but the recommendations that are in here are really well done. And they can add to so many levels of next steps and next questions, next concerns. From a coaching perspective, you could just start digging into all of this. So when it talks about future planning, it talks in here about visual spatial skill development and playing chess and checkers. you start showing up with chess under your arm, or as part of your lesson for the week or whatever. So you start using these reports to inform the skill development that you want to target. And I think that's where these reports can just be really helpful, especially the ones that are really well done. But I love the debate. I love the back and forth. This is what I was hoping to get. So thanks for people for just chiming in. Anybody that hasn't made a comment that would like to?
It's so logical to just look at the suggestions and then let that inform sort of how you're going to go about, treatment recommendations in session. It doesn't really, it's funny how I never really thought of it like that. But I mean, those are, if they're, making strong recommendations, why not just, the work's already been done, just kind of bring it to the session. So that's great. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, James is not 9 anymore. So this report is a little outdated now. They wanted to do a new report 18 months later. They wanted to revisit James's program or progress. So under the assumption that a lot's going to happen in 18 months. So the parts of this might be a little outdated, but parts maybe not. You just got to go through and ask the questions. How's he doing here now? How's this recommendation going? Any progress here? And even use this to inform the team meeting. Is this helpful?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cool. Any last points? Because I'm going to transition over to Sam, if we're okay with that. What I wrote down a couple things here before I move over to Sam. The report talks about scaffolding as a concern, and that can translate really easily into skill development in the coaching process. So you talk about get ready, do done, life skills. You talk about future planning, big picture, practicing looking at the big picture. That can play into just looking at a game of chess, but it can also play into looking at life. So how do I scaffold meaningful things like a morning routine and build that and break that down into meaningful parts? And academic skills, he talked about self-advocacy. So when you talk about maybe James should be on an IEP, and there should be goals related to his social emotional development, one of those being self-advocacy. Well, how do we practice that as a coach in our coaching sessions? And then you start thinking about school supports. What can I recommend as a coach with the family to make sure that there are strong supports in the school, and that there's a strong relationship, behavioral relationship, and support plan between home and school. So can you guys, I just did a screen switch. Can you see what I'm sharing now? The neuropsych I'm showing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if when I do that, does it actually change what you see? Okay, so is this is Sam. Can you guys get access to Sam?
Yes.
You're okay?
Yeah. I mean, I can.
Okay, so so some of you haven't seen Sam yet, so I feel like I should give you guys a chance to take a minute and just look through Sam, and we'll just kind of go through some initial reactions, okay? It's 7:41. See what you can do in 4 minutes.
Maybe I'm an idiot, but where do I find this?
Did you?
Because I look in my Google Docs and Drive and I can't find it.
And he emailed it to us, Matt, maybe in your email.
Is that Matt or Jeremiah?
Jeremiah.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
Jeremiah. Thought you were
Sorry,
No
Matt.
problem.
You guys all sound the same. All right, check now.
There's so many dudes now.
Oh, you guys all sound the same. Knock it off.
Sorry, I can't see everybody.
I'm looking for another version of the neuropsych, and where is it?
David, I have it. Oh, but you have it up too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking for 9/19/11. This is the, I think I have the wrong one open. Let me see. Okay, I think this is the one.
Yeah, it's telling me to request access whenever I try to open those.
That's annoying. Sorry, Jeremiah. Damn Google.
That's what happened to me, and I think it might have been, for some reason, it was connected to the wrong email. So now I'm able to access them. I don't know how that happened, but I've been having issues with that for the last week or two. Now I think I figured it out why. Carrie, remember you couldn't email me?
Yes. Yeah, that's crazy.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still telling me to
Yeah, I just shared.
ask for.
I just opened it, so tell me if that works for you.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So, as you guys are just trying to get a glimpse of who Sam is, this is it's a daunting task if you haven't read it yet. So I respect that. Sam was evaluated 3 times. Did anybody notice that?
Yes.
So he was evaluated 3 times. So this is a rare. It's rare to have a client that you get a neuropsych where there's evidence of 3 prior tests. But I would love to hear some initial comments that have come up on your preliminary screening of this report.
For me, I just saw slightly delayed processing speed, which probably leads to some lowered math testing scores. But in the classroom, he does perfectly fine. His math scores were, and he did it by a grade percentile. In few areas of like fluency and problem solving, he was slightly below grade average. But when you consider the Montessori school and his other environments, maybe he hadn't seen some of the material before. And with the Wyatt and the way that test works, it's you have a minute to do as many multiplication problems as you can, or addition and subtraction. So it could have just been that moment. And he does have a slightly lower, I think it's probably still in the average range processing speed. So I didn't really see any math problem. I think it'd be good for the teachers to know that maybe he needs slightly more time, but if he's performing well, I'm not sure there's much, just looking at it from an in the classroom standpoint. And I know that's the lens I always use and maybe isn't what we're looking for here, but that's just what stuck out to me.
One thing that really jumped out at me was that he went from a 21 percentile processing speed to 82nd percentile processing speed. And that's,
I am so glad you noticed that.
Did anybody notice that? That was really...
I legitimately was reading it and I was like, did they just randomly start medicating him without a diagnosis? Boom.
Right? Wow.
Okay, so those that aren't, if you understand what we're laughing at, then you're on the right page. So this page right here is what I couldn't get off of this page. I couldn't read anything else.
Yeah, it's kind of important, and it's kind of a huge difference, and it usually doesn't change, right? So, you would. It's a kind. It gives you more questions than answers.
Oh my goodness! As soon as I got to this page, I didn't go too much farther, and I texted the mom. I said, we got to talk," because obviously I read this. I'm thinking there were 3 reports done. There are 3 evaluations done over the past years. And that's the ones in parentheses. Those represent prior tests in 2015 and 2011. And the one not in parentheses is the current report, that's being done now. And I'm thinking, holy crap, what happened in those prior years to have such low processing speed and working memory? And more importantly, what came first? Is what he's doing now innately what should have been scored years ago, and what happened? What was going on? So that's why I had to get. I just had to talk to her and figure that piece out.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
Super quick. I'm sorry. Do working memory and processing speeds, motor speeds, does that pretty much go hand in hand? I mean, are we talking about 2 of the same thing?
No. Yeah, they're not two of the same thing. So the way I look at processing speed and work memory, and I'd love to hear other perspectives on that, because again, my angle on this is kind of like from a special ed perspective, not from a SLP perspective or anything else. So I see processing speed as how fast can your brain move through information. Okay, and processing speed. To what Joe said, there's typically a relationship between processing speed and fluency assessments, achievement assessments. This is why it was given. And there was always a fluency test, which is really a test of speed. How fast can you move through information? I'm going to time you, kiddo. Ready, set, go. Mm-hmm. And so you want there to be a relationship between, these scores and, oops, sorry, I lost the page there, and processing speed. So when I sit down with the Megans of the room and we're like, what did you get for processing speed? Because you want there to be a relationship between this score and that. But so that's important. Kids with low processing speed typically need extra time to manage information, to manage the pace of learning. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're the ones that might take 2 hours to get to. They're slower readers. They're slower at math, facts, stuff like that. Okay, working memory is the ability to hold information in memory, in short-term memory, really. Okay, so I give you 6 digits, 7 digits. How long can you hold in memory? There's the short recall, and then there's long-term recall.
That's like the stickiness of the notepad, so to speak. Like
yes.
Ability to okay.
Yes, and I see working memory as being a fuel tank for most kids. So if your tank is 130 gallons full, 130 gallons, and that number can be depleted as you go through the day because of stress and just wear and tear on just managing a day. And let's imagine I have 5 classes in a day. First day, I crush it because my working memory is really high. And by the end of the day, I'm pretty toast. My working memory capacity is really stunted. And by the way, I've had to maintain information from the morning all the way to the afternoon because I have homework tonight and I have to actually be able to pull some of that information from memory to get through homework tonight. Sometimes kids with with meltdowns, you can sometimes see a relationship between those meltdowns and working memory because their capacity to manage emotions and regulate their thinking in a deliberate way can sometimes be impacted based on their ability to just hold information in short-term memory. And
so theoretically, if you process quicker, it's going to have implications on the temporary holdage of information.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's going to indirectly affect that.
Maybe if you have ADHD and you have fast processing speed, life goes. You're like a jackrabbit in a slow motion movie. Right? So you have no patience. So maybe your stress tolerance is hot. You just can't handle. You want to be moving through things so fast, and so you're not really holding information in memory because you're just kind of moving through things really quickly. Life doesn't move fast enough for you to meet your brain's capacity to go.
Well, it's interesting. It's yes, like, right, Matt? Like if you were typical developing and probably not at EEC, then probably one has a lot to do with the other or correlates with the other. But then when they're in special ed or they need help, that's when they're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you might be really fast, you might be a really fast processor, but you can't hold on to any information. And then you have a learning disability.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. I also like the fuel tank metaphor, David. That's all great.
Yeah, you see it a lot when you start digging into working memory topics and stuff. It comes up a lot as an analogy. So you can't give me too much credit on that. I won't. It's just good because it's good for parents to talk to them about, like, why is my kid always melt down at the end of the day? Well, remember how we've talked about having attentional challenges, and we've talked about kind of his working memory profile being not below average. Well, that impacts his ability to handle stress at the end of the day, that kind of stuff. So I'll tell you. I'll tell you what's not written in this report, or at least my conversation with the mom. He had, when these first tests were done, he was going through a lot of trauma. He had an abusive dad, and so during these evaluations, he was really struggling with some emotional trauma, and so that's where some of these scores are really not indicative of kind of innate ability. So I had to. That was really helpful, of course, because as Caroline said, like, can you really make that much of a change cognitively? Well, typically no. That's why it was so surprising to see. And then I started to learn something else, that he has been enrolled in this Carroll School, which I think most of us should know about, the private school. And he was in the Carroll School most of his academic life. And he has dyslexia, and on top of ADHD and this trauma. So he went to that school, and that school has made a massive impact on helping to rewire his brain. And the programs they use there help to rewire the brain to integrate better. So when you think about working memory and you think about visual spatial, I mean, look at the difference. How do you go from 119 to 132 visual spatial? Like, it's astounding to go from 94 from working memory. So he went through some real daily training on using computerized programs to help build working memory skills. And and visual and executive function skills. Also, in terms of helping to rewire his brain in relation to dyslexia to improve his reading. So, I have a scheduled meeting with the director of that school, who's retiring this year. The guy is you start mentioning his name, and people start talking to him like he's he's the risen Christ. He's that impressive. And so you're kind of humbled by just the fact that you get a chance to talk to him. But I've never been to this school, and I've talked a lot about it, and I know it's impressive. But if this is the kind of results that school helps create, I'm floored. It's like I'm sold. That's just amazing. Of course, Sam's a little different because he had the trauma, so that impacts the scores too. But the mom couldn't say enough about how impressive that school was. Isn't that crazy? Other comments, takeaways from reading this report, or just skimming it?
This is shameful. Lower percentile means, I'm sorry, so what's the difference between scoring in a higher versus a lower percentile?
So, does someone want to take it? Does someone answer that?
I will if you want. So you can, if you're at 81 percentile, then 19% of children your age scored better than you. Okay, so not very many, right? Okay, and if you're 37 percentile, then 63% of children your age scored better than you.
Oh, okay, wow. I've been totally reading that wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, so
thank you so much for that clarification.
People have gotten away from the grade
welcome.
The grade equivalents, because it can kind of be a little bit. People can get hyper focused on that, as like, oh my goodness, my kid is writing. He's writing as a fourth grader. And from those that give these tests, you can give one question, and they get it wrong, and all of a sudden they drop 2 grade levels. And it's just so looking at percentile can be a little bit, a little more visually easier to translate. Other questions? That's a good one. I'm trying to go down the page. It's not letting me.
I don't have a question, but I was just noticing the lack of, if you're looking at this one versus the other, and the lack of, the recommendations don't look as impressive, yes, on this one. And maybe she's just more succinct and to the point, but the recommendations at the end just did not look as robust as the last neuropsych.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, but I think what I remember thinking was that she didn't really talk about the discrepancy in the scores or explain it or talk about how odd that was. And so for me, that discounted her credibility.
Yeah.
Are you talking discrepancy between different domains or between the times that he was assessed?
Between the times that he was assessed.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she talks about the disparity between his performance on tests of mathematics, but not the disparity between
the year between the 21 percentile and the 81 percentile, and what could attribute, because
all of our bells and whistles were going off.
It all went off for us. So then if you're not going to talk about that, then I really did you not see that? Do you not want to? That's exactly what we need to know now, and you didn't answer that kind of question.
Somebody I would think, for instance, I've been at meetings at schools with clients where I'm not the one that brings it up, but if something like that existed, I would circle it, highlight, put in a note to bring up at an IEP meeting /
Right, me
504. Yeah.
I mean, and I would actually certainly try to find the answers before an IEP meeting, right? You know, because you wouldn't want it to be something that you're talking about. Maybe,
No.
you know, no, you don't want to talk about childhood trauma for the first time, you know, at an IEP meeting. So, yeah. Anyway, that jumped out at me a little bit too.
Yeah, it's true. So I'm going to kind of ask for some takeaways. Let's just kind of go around the room here, and let's kind of take some takeaways from this training, and maybe what might be, what might be, I think just takeaways. I think, again, we took a risk kind of throwing this back onto the table in terms of a training, but when Matt brought it up, I thought this would maybe be helpful for not only Matt, myself, but the rest of us. And again, learning from you guys as much as I'm learning, from your perspective is really important. So if we can kind of walk around the room and just, who wants to start? And let's just kind of popcorn what are some takeaways from this training?
For me, it's a reminder how complicated these kids are. It just, I think that reading these reports reminded me, that everything kind of can look fine on some levels. You can see how schools can miss it. You can see how they need advocates. You can see how they need a professional to break everything down for the parents and explain it. This stuff is so complicated. And I've been doing it, you've all been doing it probably for so much longer. And I've been doing it now and, kind of like pulling these things apart maybe for about 9 to 10 years. And I'm just starting to maybe scratch the surface of understanding everything that's in them. So I just think it's a reminder that the kids are hard, that we need to talk about it, that we need to talk to each other, that we need to bounce ideas off each other, that these cases and these kids are really complex.
Awesome. Thanks for starting. Okay, who's next?
I'll go. Seven kind of quiet over here. This was really interesting, first of all, because most of my experience comes from higher ed, where students bring in all their documentation and they don't want any part of it. They want to let it go and not be a college student without anything following them around, the albatross of all this paperwork that goes with them. So I was always in the habit of meeting the student first and then reading through all their paperwork, so that I could kind of make some kind of comparison. But I also had someone who was just in charge of doing, reading these was her job, and kind of telling all of us what it all meant. So it's interesting to be that person now too, and looking at them. But I did find that one of my students this year, I did the same thing going in. I just kind of like to see the student first and then read all the information that someone else has deciphered about them. But this was really interesting, especially the data, because I'm more of a feelings emotion person. The first thing that stuck out to me, there was a divorce, and he, of course, he was probably struggling. And on our other student, that he had so much anxiety that he was, wetting his bed, and those kind of things. So that's the stuff I look at first, and then I go to the data. So I'm just kind of reversed, but this is all super helpful. Okay.
One, I think it's important to realize that the kid is so much more than just the report, and so many more factors play into it, and the report doesn't encapsulate the kid wholly. And then also, these meetings are good because then it helps you to get different perspectives and from people who are well versed in looking at these types of reports and the educational reports much more often, and can give you the understanding of the different domains that are covered in them.
I'll just say, and this probably goes totally against you, David, but I've always said to clients, and just in general, my feeling and sense about neuropsychs is that we get physicals, and neuropsychs to me has always equated to getting a roadmap of our brain at that present time. So right at that, it's a snapshot of how your brain works at that very time. So take that into account, take it for what it's worth. I think that parents have to tease out whether they think it's valuable for the process. But I mean, I'd love to like go get a physical and a neuropsych every year for myself. But that's how I feel. And I'm not like preaching that to all and every client, but that's my snapshot of your physical health and a snapshot of your mental health kind of in one fell swoop. So I'm a big proponent of them. I like reading them, but I think it's at that very time. How does the kiddo feel? What's the, there's so many factors that play into it. So that's my take.
Yeah, I don't have a whole, ton of takeaways other than just some some really important clarifications that I got from a lot of team members, which was really great. Particularly just about just some of the verbiage and just coming at it from a clinical background and being sort of familiar with the DSM-5 and all of those, a lot of the language involved with, clinical diagnoses. I find that, at least some of the stuff here between like the, working memory and, visual spatial. I mean, all this stuff is still sort of new, it's not an area that I'm as competent in. So it was really helpful just to get some clarification. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's okay. I'm half sick, so I feel like that's an excuse.
Feel better.
Thank you.
I enjoy the idea of taking the recommendations and using them in a session. I've actually had that thought and didn't feel like it was what I was supposed to be doing, so I kind of pushed it aside. So now I think I'll go ahead and use those recommendations. So I really liked that. So thank you. I think it was David who suggested that.
I also really liked the idea. I think, David, you mentioned that you were going over the report with Sam, or you were talking about that. It's like one of my favorite things to do with kids who I think especially like are struggling with seeing their own strengths, that if you can find something to highlight and explain to them, like, this is going really well for you and we can use this to build upon, I think it has a lot of power in that. And it also is nice too, because like from like, our initial sessions with families, we do ask a lot of questions that really get down to the nitty gritty of like where we want to start focusing and where we need to like see improvement. But this gives us a bigger picture than just, a lot of parents will come in and say, oh, they're inattentive, or, oh, they struggle with organization. But this tells us more than, like, it tells us why versus, how many of these reports came in because somebody was questioning if they had ADHD, when in reality it was like higher level executive functioning. And it just helps us tailor like what approach we're going to use first with the client.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Team.
Thank you.
Good stuff. This was a.
Thank you.
This I've been in my office all day, so I had to keep. I had to stay very hopeful that this get together was going to be uplifting and help me finish my day, because it was just a. Thanks for you guys. You're all amazing, and I hopefully you get out of these meetings as much as I get out of them. So. Thank you for your honesty, for just chiming in with your taking risks and just being as candid as you are. So you're awesome. Look forward to the, I would have had a barbecue, the end of the year barbecue and all that great stuff. And of course that's not happening. So we'll have to save that for later. Shall we end?
Have a good night.
All right, guys. Bye.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.